This is the Tabernacle Podcast with John Vermelia and me, Britton Bishop. What's up, John?
What's up is peach shakes are on my brain.
Peach shakes.
Peach shakes.
Chick-fil-A?
Yes, no free shout-outs?
No free shout-outs.
No free shout-outs. But what Northern Michigan doesn't know, and I do know because I'm a Chick-fil-A
Fiend
and
addict.
Knew it from back in the day. And now we finally have it here in Traverse City. What they don't know is peach shakes are limited time only. If you haven't had a peach shake yet from Chick-fil-A, don't be rolling in there and ask for vanilla or chocolate with your little sprinkle fest. You don't need no whipped cream or some cherry to ruin it. Peach shake, it's got bits of
That's a hot
peach
take.
in it.
You and Hope would get along. She's anti-whipped cream cherry.
Oh, of course, 100%. So that's just what's on the brain. But secondly,
I'm hoping it's what's in my stomach later, Rizzy.
yeah, if Martin Rizzi comes back from Traverse City today and there's no Chick-fil-A, his office will be trashed.
You'll show up Saturday and there will be no campus pastor. I'm just going to say it on the podcast. So that's
Britton's
a
going to
guarantee.
stuff Rizzi.
It's done.
Yeah, the second thing on my brain is Diamond Bar, California.
Diamond Bar.
Yeah, I've never been to Diamond Bar.
I've never been to California.
I've been to California, but not Diamond Bar. But whenever I hear the name Diamond Bar on the news, read it, see it on a map, I think of one person, my friend, my brother, my former teammate, still teammate in Christ.
Absolutely.
Eric Mills, who is our guest on the podcast today. Eric Mills, I never thought I'd see the day you'd be in the dungeon with me and the Bish.
Love it.
Welcome to the
Love
podcast.
it.
sir.
Welcome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, brief word of introduction on
for it.
Eric Mills. Eric and I met in, if I get this right, 1990.
Yeah.
I'm 20 years old. He's 21, maybe 20, 21. He's a little bit older than me by a couple months, maybe a full year. But we were on a soccer missions trip with Missionary Athletes International, also known as the Charlotte Eagles. We're both in college. He's at Bartlesville Wesleyan University, now Oklahoma Wesleyan. I'm at Indiana Wesleyan University. We're both soccer players. We're on this team. We were roommates. We played together. It was one of the most epic missions trips of all time. But I made a friend. We made friends with a friendship that has lasted, if you think about it,
Yeah.
32 years?
It is.
32-year friendship. We both ended up working.
there.
Getting up there. That's older than you are. Our friendship is older than you, brother. Older than you. But Eric just has a heart for Jesus. Married, has 3 kids, and is an ordained pastor and has his own ministry now called Faces with Names, a ministry to help the orphans of Uganda. And I'm just pumped that you're here to tell your story, man.
Yeah,
And a
thank
fan of the Murphy's Hot Hamburger.
you. Absolutely.
Wait a
Praise
minute, no
God.
free shout-outs. Who's Murphy's Hot Hamburger? Why haven't I had one?
Murphy's has attributed a lot to my life. So
What is Murphy's, what?
it's in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It's so you go in, you
Oh, I
order it.
forgot. It's two podcasts in a row. We got Okies in the
It's
house.
anarchy.
We got
Anarchy.
last week with the hearse, this week with you. This is
It's
anarchy.
what's happening. Yes, it is. Murphy's Hot Hamburger will change your life, John. No free shout outs.
What makes it unique?
You go in there, it's an open face hamburger,
What's that mean? Does it
So-
mean they don't close it?
It's got bread on the bottom.
bread on the bottom, two patties,
Yeah.
and then hand cut. Like, think about Five Guys fries, but the
Legit
dude was
fries.
smoking when he made them, right? Hand cut fries, legit,
Yes.
laid out over the top, covered in brown gravy.
Yeah.
Covered.
Dude, that almost sounds Canadian.
Oh, it's so good.
Canadians
Canada's
put
got
gravy.
nothing on us.
Canadians put gravy on French fries, and then they sprinkle it with cheese curds, goat cheese curds, and they call it poutine.
There's a stupid name, and Oklahoma would win in a fight. So that's it.
Oklahoma versus Canada. Hot take. You heard it right
that's right.
here.
But he's so where he lives currently and went to school and all that, about 15 minutes from the stomping grounds of Ulagatolala.
Ulagatolala.
So pumped.
It always sounds like you're
Yeah.
speaking
Pumped to
in
have
tongues
another-
when you say that.
pumped to have another
Ulagatolala?
Okie on here though, so
That's
I'm
right.
excited.
Yeah. that's
So
awesome.
Diamond Bar, California.
Yeah.
By way. So how to kind of break that down? How did you end up in Oklahoma? What was kind of that upbringing piece like? The question we always ask, and I'm going to do it anyways, even though
It's okay. It's a great question.
it catches people off guard and then nobody knows how to answer it. What is your first memory?
My first memory.
I should probably tell people before we
We
get
should tell
down here
people.
because then
Yeah.
it's like awkward pause.
Because Gabe Hirth took a long time for that
Love
one.
you, Gabe.
Yeah, we love Gabe.
You know, some of my first memories, I guess, I was born with a hole in my heart, of all things, and had open heart surgery when I was 5 years old. And some of my first memories, I think, are just around going to the doctor, being in the hospital, having that surgery. Kind of, I'm sure I probably have some younger memories in it, but that's the one that really sticks out because it was pretty obviously life transforming and really set the stage for me to live a healthy life. So, just I share it in a lot of the stories that I share about just. With my daughter that we have adopted, she had a hole in her heart, and so
I didn't know that.
yeah. So we went through that whole scenario with her too, when she was just over 5 years old. So, that's what stands
Doctor's
out to me.
offices.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the hospital, I mean, I was at Los Angeles Children's Hospital, and they just created this environment where kids just had a bunch of fun, but it really was to mask the seriousness of the condition that these kids are in. And so I remember, riding, tricycles up and down the hallway and big wheels and different things like that. And so it was a good memory, and I'm sure it really hurt too, but like I don't remember that part. I just remember the good part of
and that hospital smell.
Yeah,
no matter how many times they clean it, you're just like,
I think it probably
that's where
did.
people die
Yep.
and live.
Yeah.
So they get it fixed. They fixed
They
it.
did,
They
man.
hold
I
it-
did. I had a successful surgery, and pretty much every year from that point on till I was about 18, I had to go for an annual checkup, and then they were kind of like, "Hey, man, you're good." So, I've been very fortunate that it was a successful surgery and lived a healthy life. Now, my daughter was when we adopted her and she came home from China, we thought, kind of based on my experience, oh yeah, just one surgery, she'll be good. 7 surgeries later.
Oh my.
For Hope, yeah. But she's same thing. She is a trooper, man. I mean, she went through all of those, but we even as a family, we spent a lot of time in the hospitals for her to get healthy as she is now. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. So grow up that way. Did you grow up in a Christian home? What was that process like, kind of coming through that stuff?
So both of my parents are originally from South Dakota. So they went to a Bible college in Kansas. Became really good friends with
What school was it?
Miltonville Wesleyan College.
Okay.
And so my dad studied to be a pastor, and they had 2 really good friends of theirs that now I call my aunt and uncle. They're kind of my surrogate aunt and uncle. He was from Wisconsin, she was from Iowa, and somehow they moved to Southern California, and they graduated a year ahead of my parents, and they were like, "Hey, you guys should come out here." And so my parents, it was kind of back in the, I guess, probably legalistic days of, kind of Wesleyan denomination. Like in South Dakota, if you were ordained, men weren't allowed to wear wedding rings.
Oh yeah.
And my dad was like, "I'm wearing a wedding ring." And so they moved to California where they don't care if you wear a wedding ring.
Dean doesn't mess around.
Yeah.
Dean knows.
That's the dumbest rule I've ever heard.
It's a dumb rule.
Yeah.
It's
I
a dumb
wouldn't have
rule.
lasted long back then.
I know, it is. It's kind of crazy. And I'm glad that they did because, so my dad ended up going out there. He was a youth pastor at a Wesleyan church. I pretty much, from the day I was born, I was in church and, grew up with, Christian influence. My parents loved the Lord grew up playing soccer. Soccer was kind of my big sport. And I remember it being very important for my parents to be at church. Even when I had games on Sunday or something like that, we never went to a game before we went to church, so we always were in church and then we would just.
And you don't hate your parents?
No, I love
interesting.
my parents. Yeah.
It's interesting. You went to church instead of your games and you don't hate your parents.
Yeah.
Well, somebody needs to think about that one for a
So
minute.
Eric, you were always in church,
Yeah.
but and we left out. You have a brother, younger.
I do.
He has a younger brother.
I do. Yeah.
Who just reminds me of another brother named Bub. So Bub, if you're listening, this is you, right? He likes to blow up stuff.
Yeah.
But even though you're in church, I know a little bit of your story.
Yeah.
In the teen years,
I definitely got pretty wild, man. I was, even though I was still going to church, my parents were, at that point, were dragging me to church, I guess. And, but yeah, I got pretty wild. I was pretty actively drinking, smoking pot pretty regularly. I had a lot of friends that were doing drugs, but I was always a little, scared, I guess, to do other drugs just because of my heart situation. Right. It was probably a good thing, just that I had that healthy fear of not, getting deeper into some of the drugs that they were doing. But yeah, I was pretty wild. I mean, and obviously as you go through those years, I mean, I definitely had, times, especially with my dad, that we really just, fought tooth and nail. And but my parents, I mean, they were amazing. They just, I look back now and, just over time, just had developed such an amazing relationship with my dad. And what I do now, like with an orphan care and stuff like that, is I'm like, I never did not know what it meant to have a father that didn't love me, and to that just really set the stage for me to really understand God's love for me and that father's love. And I know that so many people don't have that, and it's a tough barrier to get over. But yeah. So anyways, I was pretty wild for a number of years. I started pretty early. I mean, early junior high. I mean, I was drinking pretty heavily, but going into right at towards the end of my junior year at high school, I had a cousin. She was really close to me. Her and I were more like a brother and sister. I mean, she just was always around our house, and we just got along really great. But she was a senior. She was 2 weeks from her high school graduation, and she was at work one night, and some of her friends had been out drinking, and she called her mom and said, "Hey, can I go out, just be out for a little bit longer?" And it was only like an extra hour, from when she got off work to when she was supposed to be home. And the guy who was driving had been drinking and drove off a cliff. And my cousin, unfortunately, I mean, I'm thankful that nobody else was hurt, but my cousin was the only one killed in that accident. And so 2 weeks after her death, I walked across her graduation platform and received her diploma for her. And I mean, I still distinctly remember. I mean, her chair was sitting there, her cap and gown draped over it, but she wasn't there. And that was a really, obviously, monumental change in my life, because I was like, man, that could have been me so many different times, in that car, and I could have done it to somebody else. Yeah. And so really, I almost had an immediate just change. And so really, all the stuff that I learned growing up from my parents, going to church, that's what I really clung on to. And I really started seeking the Lord. And so, I remember, man, going into my senior year of high school, it was probably the loneliest year of my life, because, I mean, everybody that I hung out with was still out partying all the time and stuff like that. And so it took me a while to say, man, I can't be around that, because I'm going to probably fall, and I'm going to just keep doing it and stuff like that. So I went to the car races. I was super into cars and car racing and stuff like that. My dad owned a roofing company back then, and so I worked a lot for him. But just that year, I really started going to church on my own. We, in Southern California, I mean, you can drive, 45 minutes and you go through 10 cities or whatever. And so we went to a church. It was kind of a long ways from our house, and we had gone there for many years, and I just was like, I'm not into this. And so I don't even remember how I ended up at this church, but it was close to our house. And I mean, I started going to church by myself as a senior in high school. So my parents went on their own. I drove over there, and I remember the pastor, having this deal where it was like, read through the Bible in a year. And I mean, I did it. I mean, I literally
And I know at that time, you're not a reader.
No,
that's not your jam.
No, it isn't, man. But it was crazy. I still have this little thing that you check the thing off. It wasn't back in the Bible app or anything back then. I mean, it was legitimate. Like, you checked the mark off, and I went through it. And so towards the end of that year,
sorry,
yeah,
we got I didn't mean to. Well, I did interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem.
But I got a student ministries pastor. We have some students that do listen to this. I want to go back for a second.
Yeah, I've got questions too.
Yeah, go.
Yeah,
the loneliest year was your senior year because you gave Christ your yes. Is what I heard.
100%. No, there's multiple threads that are being pulled in my head, but one, just speaking to that fact, because there's so often in student ministry that the phrase I hear often, especially in Northern Michigan, is something we talked about in the lobby, right? I mean, doing student ministry in Oklahoma is like shooting fish in a barrel, dude.
Yeah,
these kids. They come to church because practice is over at 4:30 on Wednesday, and you don't miss anything because your life is built around it, because that's just how the Bible Belt is. But up here, it's a conscious decision to follow Christ. It's a hard decision for a lot of the students that we interact with, and it's one that leads to often, unfortunately, students feeling isolated, alone, like they're the only one doing it. And obviously that's a thing, like it's true, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but you go to a student ministry with 60 other kids, so there's probably a little bit of community within that.
Absolutely.
But speaking to that student, right, why did you keep saying yes, even though you knew it was going to cost you, quote unquote, everything?
Yeah. I think it's just one of those situations where you look at your life and think, like, I've experienced the bad part, I mean, I've done enough dumb things. You can only get so drunk. You can only get so high. You can only have, be with so many girls, whatever, that kind of situation. And you're just like, it's not fulfilling. I just happen to do it way younger in my life than most people do, I think, And so when I reached that point of my cousin being killed, one, it obviously was a traumatic experience, but it really set the stage for me to just really stand up for what I believe in. I kept saying yes because I didn't want to go back. I knew how miserable it was. And I saw how miserable my friends were. Honestly, I mean, it's just one of those situations where when you start getting a little bit more clarity in your head and stuff like that, and, and even just reading the Bible, I mean, that was significant to me because I was like, man, I mean, I've gone to church my whole life. And then when you really start digging into the Bible, God really does speak to you. I mean, the Holy Spirit really started pinpointing things in my life that I was like, man, I do need to surrender that. And it was a situation where I had enough bad that I didn't want to deal with that anymore. And it was worth it. I mean, it's so crazy now, like, with Facebook and stuff like that. I mean, I look back on so many friends from high school that, I mean, I didn't think they had any spiritual background at all, but there are a ton of people that I went to high school with now that are very open with their faith, or clearly Christians and stuff like that. But I did not feel that way at all, man. I didn't know any of them at that time. So, it just, honestly, I mean, I think for me a little bit, I've kind of always been wired to like, I'm willing to, if I'm the only one, I don't care. I mean, I'm willing to make that stand, and it definitely felt like that, because I mean, you know how it is in high school, man. I mean, if you're out partying with people, then like all of a sudden you're not.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're razzing me, man. I mean, they're giving me a hard time, but I didn't care. I mean, I just went, yeah.
So this is way before your time, but there are some boomers like me who listen to this podcast, and I promise that we don't have to live here. But back in the day, 1990, MTV, there was a guy named Gerardo who sang "Rico, da di da da, suave," right? And it was just this worldly, like, I don't know, Spanish rap type deal, and there was all scantily clad women, and it was just like a big party scene. You went to school with that guy.
He went to Walnut High School, but I mean, a bunch of people that were in that video are people I went to high school with.
Yeah,
I mean, and I knew him because he was always over at Dunbar High School because he was an amazing dancer, and I mean, that was when breakdancing and the whole popping thing and all that stuff.
But he told me around a bonfire at my house, I think it was, or maybe before the bonfire, that guy who was the heart and soul, you made me think of it by what you just said about your Facebook friends, is, the Where Are They Now? You said and it says it right in his Wikipedia. He's a pastor in Ohio.
He's a pastor now.
And this dude was on MTV, man, slaying it on the awards.
He was on he's been in a number of movies. I mean, he was very successful.
And now he's following Jesus.
I mean, and he loves the Lord, man. He's a pastor. And
cool.
So, it is there's a documentary on it that's super cool. They just...
So Tracy Kalita, if you're listening, that was for you.
There's another...
Clayton Scripjack, I know you're listening, that was for you. Rico Suave, look it up.
There's another thread, too, that I wanted to pull because there was something you said about all the things that I had heard growing up, right? These kind of seeds planted. Over time, they didn't return void. And so I think, speaking to the parents as well that listen to this podcast that have those kids that seem like, man, is there anything? Is this going to work out? Like, is my kid ever going to follow Jesus? I don't want to shove it down their throat, right? But just finding that balance. And you pointed to the fact, like, man, when I didn't want to follow, me and my dad had some conflict.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, some tension there, but now I love my dad.
Yeah.
And so I think just to encourage, if there was anything you could say to those parents, like, what are some things maybe your dad did well that you look back and you're like, man, like, even though at the time I hated it, I'm glad he did this. And so kind of just speaking to those parents that are walking through that right now with the teens and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first immediate thing is just don't give up. I mean, just keep praying, stay faithful. You got to be real. I mean, I think in today's age, culture, whatever, I mean, kids are just looking for authenticity. So, I mean, if parents aren't living that at home, I mean, they could see it and they're like, why would I do this? I mean, like, just because you're acting like this in front of other people at church, but I see what you're like at home. That was one thing that my parents did really well. I mean, my parents were authentic. I mean, my dad loved the Lord. My mom loved the Lord. I mean, when I graduated, my mom, wrote me this little note. I still have it, and just was like, just the prayers that she prayed over me for all those years and stuff like that, and I, now we'll tell my mom stories of like, yeah, this is the crazy stuff we did, and she's like, oh man, I'm glad I didn't know that, back then or whatever. But the bottom line is I know that it always seems like, oh yeah, you just pray for them, but there is just something about praying for your kids, and just loving on them, and just living your own faith out, that they see that, I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely a balance, because you don't want to be nagging on kids, because it seems like, we all have that nature of like, the more somebody tells me not to do something, it seems like I do it more. And I think that's real. So you have to have some balance, but I mean, you can't just say like, yeah, do whatever you want, I don't care. I mean, I think you have to keep the balance of like, this is really who we are as your parents. This is what we believe in. And, even though that's not the life that you're choosing to live right now, I mean, we're hopeful that someday it will. The seeds that we've planted in you will bear fruit, and it's no question about it. I mean, it was all of that I mean, I just like ran to when I had that tragic situation in my life. Yeah. I hated going to church, man. I mean, like like I said, we went to this church, and there was a Christian school, so most of the youth group were all at this Christian school together. So I wasn't really even a part of it, even though I was kind of, I guess, could be considered a popular kid. I wasn't there. Like in my arena, I was, but like when I went there, dude, I mean, kids are brutal, And so me and this other kid, we literally the way that our church was at, it was like the church was over here, then you had to walk a couple blocks where they bought a youth place, and this other guy and I. It wasn't a gym. It was just.
He's trying to get a gym. Sorry.
You definitely should have a gym. I mean, come on.
Whoa! Oklahoma just ganged up on the yeah. Sorry, you walked over to the place.
Yeah. Well, I walked over to the place, but walked right past it. We just went to a donut shop, got donuts, so kind of timed it. Hey, when do we need to be back to catch a ride home with our parents? Yeah. And so, like, I didn't even go. So it wasn't like this influence of like, oh my goodness, like I'm, my youth pastor was, I mean, that's all. I got a bad story about that, but I mean, it just was kind of embarrassing to me. Like I didn't want to even have any part of it. But on the other hand, just the fact that my parents were so consistent and were just, they were stuck in, as we would say in soccer, I mean, it wasn't just a casual thing for them. And
I knew your dad better than I knew your mom. Yeah. And your dad is just one of the legitimately most loving, gracious, kind, even his smile. Yeah. Like whenever you talk to Dean, either I talked him on the phone or saw him live back when we were in North Carolina, it's just genuine, like love oozed out of him.
Yeah, it was an amazing guy. And so I went from that just kind of really tense relationship with my dad, because I don't necessarily know that they always handled it right. I mean, like, I think, when they would know that I was out drinking or like, kind of they tried to give me the birds and bee talk, I'm like, we're well past that at this point. So, unfortunately, but I mean, they gave it the college effort, and it's just one of those things that they genuinely loved me. They cared about my brother and I mean, and just even like, I mean, for my dad, I mean, he loved people. I mean, he just, he talked to everybody and he loved people, but, he loved my mom. I mean, he never left the house without kissing my mom, telling her love. He loved her and always opened the door for her. I mean, there's just those kind of things that like my dad showed, just legitimate. Like he was the real deal. And it I went from that real super tense relationship with him to he became my best friend. I mean, like we literally talked on the phone. I mean, until he passed away. I mean, we talked on the phone every day. And so. And I'm, I miss him. I miss that because, I mean, we've over the last number of years, I mean, we've been through some major decisions and major things. And I'm just like, man, the first person I'd be calling right now would have been my dad, you know? And so I miss that part of it. So anyways, that was a long answer to say, just don't give up. I mean, don't give up on your kids. Just love on them.
Yep.
And
I think you hit on a key piece too with that authentic living.
Yeah.
Because I think that so many kids over time have seen families play church.
Right.
And it's like, but at the end of the day, we're just wasting a Sunday, right?
Yeah.
And I heard a pastor the other day talking about that kind of that thread, and he said, he's like, just take your kids wakeboarding. It'll be more fun. You're wasting your time if you're just going to play church.
Exactly.
And so, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. So, coming out of high school, right, started going to church senior year, all that stuff, really getting after it. Did that kind of lead to, man, you know what, I might go to a Christian university, try to play some ball while I'm there, or what was that kind of process look like?
Yeah, so I was starting to get recruited from a number of Christian schools out in Southern California, and my parents were just like, go to at least 1 year at Christian college, we'll pay for it, you know, really encouraging me and stuff like that. And I, like I said, my dad owned a roofing company. My biggest dream was to be a race car driver. And so, like, you know, roofing companies, you always see roofing companies on, you know, sponsors on race cars and stuff. I'm like, well, in order for me to race cars, I'm going to start a roofing company so I can do that. And so a buddy of mine that also worked for my dad, we were going to go and get start our own roofing company. And so that was kind of the plan that I had. And it was crazy because literally every year of my life up until that point, you know, growing up in Southern California, but we always went to South Dakota for like 2 months because my dad was a school teacher, and with the roofing company, made enough money. We just like got in the car and left and spent the 2 months in South Dakota. Well, going into my senior year, the summer before my senior year, I didn't. My parents let me stay in Southern California by myself, which I still am like, what were you guys thinking? Even though I was like making that change, you know, I mean, it's still, I mean, I wasn't quite there yet, but I mean, anyways, a cousin of mine got married in South Dakota, and I flew back there and for the wedding, and there was a bunch of these people went to, at the time, Bartlesville Wesleyan College. And they were all like, hey, you need to come and visit. And I'm like, why would I leave Southern California to go to Oklahoma? I mean, that was kind of my attitude.
You okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
You good?
That's good.
You've been to California.
It's fine.
Diamond Bar.
It's fine. I don't care.
Yeah. Well,
it's not Bartlesville.
Yeah.
Ain't no Murphy's in California.
That's
It'll be a Beyond Burger.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, so anyways, crazy enough, I was like, okay, I'll come back and look at it. And I mean, at the time, they didn't even have a soccer coach in place. But I decided, I went back for like a visitation day, and I was like, man, this place is a blast. I had fun. And so I ended up going there. They hired a coach right after who, you know, my soccer coach ended up being a huge influence in my life. And Dan Wood and just was, I mean, it just is a crazy experience for me. And so my plan was to go 1 year of college, you know, that my parents were going to pay for, and I was going to go back and start this, roofing company. And so my buddy was getting all of our stuff in place. And after my first semester, my first semester didn't go that great. I played soccer, but I didn't really go to classes. So that was a little bit of a problem.
Been there, done that, my friend.
So,
this is your soulmate over here.
So I failed every class I took my first semester of college except soccer. And I even got a B in that. Dan said that I didn't have a very good attitude, so I didn't even get an A in soccer. So
what a punk!
Yeah. So, anyways, I always tell people, I had a 3 GPA and a 0.3 GPA in my first semester in college. So, but when I was like, this is a waste of time. I'm gonna go back and just start this company. And like a couple weeks before I was gonna head home, met a girl. You know how that messes everything up, and so I ended up going back, and early on in my second semester of college, I was doing my devotions one day and felt God call me into ministry, and I was like, I don't even know what this means. So I mean, I called my dad, called my buddy, and I was like, hey, I think I'm gonna at least stick it out for a little bit longer in college, and so I did. I ended up going 5 years because I had to make up for that first tragic semester.
Victory lap.
I've been on a victory lap.
So anyway, that was kind of how it all played out, and yeah.
How did you get on that mission trip? The mission trip, because it would have been your junior year. It was right after my sophomore year, I think.
Yeah.
But dude, I have a picture that the kids dug out from when they were going through stuff during COVID. And we traveled all the way to Oklahoma. And so I'm all in red, Indiana Wesleyan, captain, and I'm shaking hands with the captain of BWC. And we'd just been in Europe all summer together that summer. And we're like, yeah.
That's cool.
So the thing that I always have to rub in with John is that, of course, we beat them.
Yeah, they didn't smash us. It was tight.
It was tight, but we still won. So,
but that's also because our striker got a stinking red card right in front of your bench.
Can you believe all these years later, and he's still crying about a red card that probably was legit?
It was 100% legit. I'm not sad at you. I'm sad because he was the most gifted player I've ever played with, including professional. And he do you remember? He rainbowed. He flicked up a ball behind him so it comes over his head. It's a trick move. But he did it to their most hot-headed defender, or a hot-headed defender, right in front of their bench, right? And then he did it again.
Yeah,
and the guy was so mad that he barged into him. And he broke his face with an elbow.
Yeah,
it was a fiasco, dude. I had to get called to give a report. We were at fault. We deserved to lose, but it was I'm just saying.
I know. Anyway,
dude, I'm still sad.
I had to rub that in.
I'm still sad. 32 years later, I'm still sad. Jacob E. saying, control yourself.
Yeah. So anyways, played soccer, and we had this, guy come in, spoke at chapel, and he had just gotten back from Uganda, of all places, with Missionary Athletes International. The Orange Seahorses had gone to Uganda.
I forgot that was you guys' name.
That was in California.
That was the California
office.
Yeah, that was the California office.
Is that who you played with at wherever you were?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was the trip. So the mission trip that I'm going to talk about that we went on was the Orange Seahorses.
Yeah.
But on that trip is when John and I both felt called into sports ministry,
that's right.
And that's how we both ended up in Charlotte. Yeah.
I'm talking about I don't remember which story it is where you tell your team name was the Seahorses.
Yeah. It was both of those trips. So the first
It's a
trip.
horrible name. Yeah. That's why soccer gets made fun of. I want you guys to know that.
I don't know why they did it.
It wouldn't be. It's not. I mean, it is kind of a funny name, but in California, probably it's more legit.
How does
out
a
there,
seahorse kick anything?
Yeah.
Carries a ball in his pouch. But I'd already been on a trip. Right after my freshman year. So right after my sophomore year, I'd signed up for a trip. And you said that the chapel speakers got you.
So this guy came and spoke about this trip he had just gotten back from with MAI to Uganda. And he was kind of like, you can combine your passion for Christ and your passion for soccer and use them together and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, hey, man, this sounds pretty good. So, I mean, I literally walked out of that chapel service. We had a prayer chapel, went over, and I sat down and I was like, God, if you want me to go on one of these trips, make it obvious to me. And that was all I prayed. I got up and walked out. And I went from the prayer chapel, was going to go eat lunch. And before I was going to eat lunch, I thought, well, I'm just going to check my mail. And we're talking all of this in a matter of 10, 15 minutes. So I prayed that prayer, God, make it obvious to me, go over to my mailbox, and I open it up, and there's a brochure for trips from Missionary Athletes International for that summer, 1990. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty obvious. So I ate lunch. I went back over to my dorm. I called the office out in L.A., and I don't know if you remember Chrissy. She was from England.
Yep. Hello, it's Chrissy from England.
Yeah, so I was talking to her. And I didn't know her. I mean, I just like, hey, I just got this brochure. I said, I'm interested in going on this trip this summer. Can you send me some stuff? So she's like, yeah, can I have your name, your address, and stuff like that? So I told her my name, got about halfway through my address, and she said, are you from Oklahoma? And I'm like, yeah, I live in Oklahoma. And she said, I just sent you an application like 3 days ago. And this family that I told you started off with were like my aunt and uncle, Cheryl had called the MAI office and said, hey, you guys need to send an application to, Eric in Oklahoma. So that's how I ended up on the trip, man.
The Lord was conspiring against you. Yeah. Did you have enough signs?
I didn't, man. Yeah. I mean, it still took me like another month. No, I knew right then, man. Even from the brochure, even if she had already sent me the application, I mean, just the brochure alone, I was like, okay, God, you're making this obvious. So, yeah, so that's how I ended up on that trip. I mean, that's how John and I met in 1990.
You guys were roommates.
We were roommates, yeah.
Oh, the rest of the guys were just idiot. No, I'm just kidding. No, we just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah,
it was just a little bit,
we just hit it off, man.
We got along, and
yeah.
And
So
and that was a crazy trip too. So we don't have to break down that whole trip. It's just, this podcast is not about that trip, but Germany. Then we were in 3 vans that drove to Poland. Coach thought it would be a great idea for us to stop at Auschwitz and tour it.
Yeah,
and that was heavy.
Yeah, it was heavy.
Heavy.
Yeah,
could do a whole podcast on Auschwitz. I've been there twice now.
Yeah,
and then from Poland into what was Czechoslovakia at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy ministry story. Tab family, if you've been around when I've told the story once from stage, let's toast Jesus one more time. Eric was there. And
I was
laughing
sitting at the table.
He was laughing because he knew where this was going. Because he'd already been down that road. I'd never been down that road, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know the story, you don't need to know it. And then, dude, just the bus ride through Austria and into the Swiss Alps and then down into Italy. We were at the 1990 World Cup. It was like 5 countries.
Yeah, it's crazy.
3
we got
fender benders.
Yeah,
all by the same
3
guy.
World Cup matches.
Yeah, man. There was a sausage fight.
There was a sausage fight
on the highway. Coming into the in Poland, with this crappy lunch that they'd packed us. We were grateful. But 98% meat-free sausage is not to be consumed.
That's some California stuff right there.
No, dude, this is Polish. We're chucking it at each other. It was epic. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but when one of the vans, I was sitting in the front seat and Brian was driving and Chris was sitting in the middle and I was on the the window, and one of the vans pulled up next to us, and they threw it out, and I saw it coming.
And I do remember.
I ducked down, and it literally nailed our coach's wife in the head
because he ducked.
Because I ducked. It was.
I just got hit with a sausage, bro. It was.
Yeah, it was totally out of instinct. I mean, I didn't mean for her to get hit, but it still wasn't probably the greatest for playing time when I, allowed my coach's wife to get nailed in the head with a sausage.
But we also learn very important life lessons. We learn important things about the Lord. We learn very important things about missions, like foundational principles of missions.
Yeah, absolutely.
For example, when it's about midnight, 1 a.m., and you're at the border of Czechoslovakia, and the leader is got everybody's passports with security guards that have Kalashnikovs, right? And one of your guys has to pee. It's not a good idea at the border to suddenly jump out the van and start running towards the trees.
We seriously could have had a casualty.
Yeah.
No.
And then
doubt.
because dude, they were communists still. And then they're like, you do not have everyone here. And he's doing a head count and it doesn't match.
Yeah. Because the one guy decides to go out and take he
had to go take a leak in the woods. He went running. Dude, we're like, don't go. And he's like, no, I got to go so bad. I'm going to pee my pants. I got to go. He goes running in the dark for the trees. So he comes back, and I'll never forget Rick McKinley, God bless him. Aaron, you don't run to the trees at the border. And this is like a 23-year-old guy who in the van starts crying.
He was very homeschooled.
Here comes Benji. He's coming for you.
I love it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So you go on that trip, make connections, all that stuff. How did you end up in Charlotte?
Oh, sorry, Florence, man.
Yeah, so on that trip, I mean, we ended up in Italy. We had 3 teams that were kind of all over Europe at the time. We all converged in Italy to do ministry. And we were at this church. They had this service for everybody in Florence, Italy at this little church. And I don't even remember that much about it other than, they talked about doing sports ministry and all that kind of stuff.
Full-time.
Full-time. Full-time calling. And like I said, when I felt called into ministry, I really didn't know what that looked like, what it meant. And so that was where my ministry calling really got specific. And I mean, there was a number of us, Paul Zimmerman, there was Tom
Merchant?
Merchant,
I think Merchant was on one of
there
those.
was about 5 or 6 guys.
5 or 6 guys that we all stood up. Because there was a bunch of us there, but only 5 or 6 of us stood up.
Yeah.
And 4 of us, I think, ended in Charlotte.
Ended up in Charlotte. So that was in 90, and then I graduated in 92 and ended up moving to Charlotte because the Charlotte office was brand new at that time because everybody was still out in Southern California, and then so Brian and Rick, who were our tour leaders, ended up moving back to Charlotte, started that office, and it was kind of like, yeah, we're starting this office, and then like when they started, they're like, yeah, we got this thing, maybe we'd like to have a pro team, and it was kind of like we didn't really know what was going to happen with that, and so I ended up moving back there. It took me about a year to raise support, and then I ended up moving back there and started. The first year I was with Rick, we ended up helping him co-lead, or I was his assistant director for a trip to Russia, and then that summer I led a U19 team for the Seahorses with Gary Hogue, if you remember that.
You really were part of piloting. So just to back up a second, when we say sports ministry, we had 3 components. We took these international trips because soccer, no offense, but football is the capital of the world. It was a passport to anywhere in the country. Yeah. You go to a closed country if you're bringing a soccer team, which is also why they named themselves the Seahorses and not the Orange County Christian Crusaders. You know what I mean? Or the Knights Templar of God.
But there are plenty of other names than the Seahorses.
This is true. This is true.
They can try all day.
But that was just the Seahorses, we had the Eagles, and so you took these mission trips, but we also did summer camps for kids because soccer was booming, it still is, but you want to send your kid to camp for a week, and it's a Christian camp, and so it's like a soccer VBS. We did those all up and down the East Coast. Yeah. And then teams were a part of it, whether they were youth teams or they actually, I guess it was we at the time, bought a professional franchise. We bought the rights to what was the USISL. Now it's the USL, which there was no Major League Soccer. So this was the highest division, and they had the franchise, and all of us are living on nothing. Like we're all support-raising missionaries, and we think we're going to put a pro team into the pro league. It's not a Christian. People have asked me that. Was it a Christian league? No. It was a cutthroat professional league, and it was about what the Pit Spitters would be now. It was about that size, and So then a year or so after I got there, 94.
So it had been.
Or actually, I moved there November '93 with Darcy.
Okay. Yeah. So then John and I worked together on the high school trips, and so our friendship even grew even deeper, and
soccer youth pastors, baby.
Yeah, we were.
Played on the team. He played more than me.
Well, it's because they won.
Yeah, exactly. It all goes back to the game. Now you see my angst. Just the little things at the pro level. The little things.
We were a great combination. I was kind of John was the good cop, I was the bad cop, and he, how he is, just keeps everybody going, brings fun to the party, and I was the one. I don't get along with kids very good, man. I'm like, it was just crazy since I was like stupid. That's what I was. I was like, I had been through all that in high school. I'm like, why would you do this? That is so stupid. Like, so I just wanted him to change like immediately. I didn't really have much kind of like.
This is me and Adam Sharp.
Yeah, great.
This is me and Adam Sharp. I'm the fun guy. Joke around, and Adam is the enforcer.
Stop it.
My favorite moment that I've had with Adam. You met him upstairs. We're at a camp, and I'm sleeping. I was in a speaker cabin, but that was just because I needed to get some sleep. But so I'm over in here, and I get a text from Adam, and he goes, "Am I allowed to go into another church's youth group's cabin and tell them to shut up?" He goes, "I don't know if their leader knows what he's doing."
And you said yes.
I wouldn't, but I'm sure you will. And he texts me back, "Done."
The one story that I can tell about John, I mean, like John, one of the trips that we were in Amsterdam, we had our training camp there, and one of the players brought. Do you remember this? Brought clippers with him.
Oh yeah, he's giving haircuts.
So like
mohawks, buzzes. He was doing.
We're there to like try to share Christ and stuff like that, and like all of a sudden everybody's getting their head shaved, and I'm like, we're starting to look like the Aryan nation here, basically. I mean, it was not good.
One guy got it, another guy. Everyone wanted it.
And then I finally had to say, if you did not have your haircut like this before you come on this trip, nobody else is getting their haircut. So like I make this big speech, did all that kind of stuff. The next thing I know, after I make this big speech, John comes out with his head shaved.
I didn't hear the speech. I did not hear the speech. and I'm supposed to be his colleague in crime, and I had this sweet shaved hair. I forgot about that. That was so
I was like,
yeah, you can cut my hair. I don't care. They're like, they were gonna get him in trouble with Eric.
Yeah, and then this other kid after John, he had this real bushy hair, like real long, and somebody's like, well, we know how to do this. They shaved him right down the center of his head. So he had these two big clumps of hair. And so then he had to. And I was like, where are the clippers? I'm taking the clippers. I can't trust John or any of the rest of you.
That's amazing. That's a good memory.
That was funny.
We worked out the kinks in the relationship.
I laughed about it after
were you
the
totally
fact,
you were there for how many years before you felt it's time to move on?
Yeah, so I was there from 92 to 97. So I was there for 5 years.
Yeah. And not just that we worked together. Eric, he had a roofing company and knows his way around a hammer.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to give you a story now where we were out building wheelchair ramps for people. Like when stuff broke, I'd be like, Eric, how do I fix this? On a car, at the house, barbecued together. We're always hanging out together. Yeah. And so the friendship was deep. I mean, we've been in some crazy international situations together, but we also saw God move in some amazing ways.
Awesome.
Places like Sweden. We made a lifelong friend of a pastor. I don't know if he listened to the podcast, but Tue Inavoltsen, who we're still in contact with on Facebook. My daughter went and stayed in his home when she was on a European trip. Just a lovely man of God and a Viking, taller than you, and will hurt you when he hugs you, like literally, like legit guy. But just saw God move in some amazing ways, change lives, and got to play together and work together, and it was just good times.
Awesome. So 97, you're done with kind of the Charlotte area. So what starts to unfold there?
So at that time I went back. It was kind of a crazy deal. I had dated a girl for a long time, the girl that made me go back to college and stay there and stuff like that, and dated her for quite a long time. And just it was looking like that wasn't going to work, or we weren't going to get married. And so I had a accountability partner, and he was kind of like tired of hearing me like complain about all of that, and one day I remember I was sitting there, we were talking, and he said, Eric, I think you should move away from Charlotte, because this girl had moved back there, whatever. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty bold statement, and so literally later that afternoon, I got a call from Oklahoma Wesleyan University and called me and asked me if I was interested in going and coaching the men's soccer team there. And so I was like, okay. So that was kind of that next transition. Ended up going back to Bartlesville and coached there for 3 years. And in that time is when I ended up meeting the lady who's now my wife, and we were back out in Southern California. Again, I mean, so many meaningful things in my life, with my aunt and uncles, Jerry and Cheryl. They had an adopted daughter from Korea, and so grew up with her. And my wife, although she grew up in South Dakota, ended up going out to Southern California, Zoo Pacific University, and became really good friends with Marcy. And so my wife and I met at her wedding. And so that's a whole long story, but just a total God story. So we met. I was 30 years old at the time. She was about 5 years younger than I am, but about a year later we got married, and so at the time I was coaching men's soccer at Oklahoma Wesleyan. Was planning on going into business with my dad. We were going to start building houses together, and so that was kind of what Susan signed up for, or whatever. And a month after we got married, I was back out in Southern California. Was with Charlie, John's brother-in-law.
Uncle Charlie. He's been on the podcast.
Yeah, at a camp out there at Skyline Wesleyan, and Adrian Dupre was the speaker, and did the 4 chairs. And I'm listening to this, and I'm like, I'm definitely not sitting in that first chair. And so, the altar call of that is getting down prostrate and just saying, God, what's keeping me from sitting in that first chair? And I just was praying that, and as soon as I stood up, there was a pastor that walked by me, and I was like, God said, you're supposed to be a pastor. And I was like, okay, I've been married a month. My wife thinks I'm going to coach soccer and build houses. And God, you are saying you want me to become a pastor. And so it was already late out in California, so it was a couple hours later. So I just remember going back to my hotel room and just getting down on my knees and just praying, like, God, if you're really calling me to this, like, I can't do this on my own. Like, you have to call Susan. Like, she has to be on board with this. And so I didn't call her that night because, it was late. And so the next day I was flying home, called her from the Houston airport. And I'm like, hey, I got some exciting news for you, but I want to tell you in person. And so later after that, when she picked me up from the airport, I told her about the whole situation. And she said, as soon as I told her that in the Houston airport, she said, I knew we were moving. And so it wasn't, I didn't only just feel the call to be a pastor. It was like, you're called to be a pastor and you need to go to seminary. And that was like, it was just because I wasn't a great student. I never really, gave it a very good effort in college. And so it was just, that's what it was. And so I shared all that stuff with her. I had to share with my dad. I mean, that was pretty hard. I mean, because like I said, my dad and I were so close and he was looking forward to us. But I did end up coaching that last season. And then they let me the second half of the year where I'd normally been recruiting and stuff like that. I built a house with my dad, one house. And then that next summer we moved to Wilmore, Kentucky, ended up going to Asbury Theological Seminary. And yeah, so that was, it just is amazing because it's one of those situations where like each step you just see how God moves and kind of leads into the next season of our life. Because while we were there is when my wife became friends with a lady who was a social worker and worked with families adopting little girls from China. And so my wife, came home from hearing about all these little girls in China and was like, I just feel like God's laying this on my heart that we'd adopt a little girl from China. And I was like, no, I have zero interest in that. I don't want to have anything to do with adoption. And you know how it is with God, man. You just say those kind of things. And it's like, so I went from that to, I lead an orphan care ministry. I have an adopted daughter. From China. Up until recently, I served as the U.S. Pastoral Director for Orphan Sunday and Sand Sunday with Christian Alliance for Orphans. And so my whole life shifted, but it really was a part, we ultimately, it was a long process. My wife prayed for me for 8 years for us to ultimately end up in.
Was that before your son and daughter were born?
Yeah, we didn't have any kids at that time. So we were still in seminary, didn't have any kids of our own at that time.
When it was first laid on her heart.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. So we, she got pregnant with Reagan right at the very end of our time in seminary, and Reagan was born in Colorado when we were at our first church out there or whatever, but yeah, it was 8 years, man. She just would always just say, hey, don't forget about that little girl in China. And so kind of fast forward, lots of story in between that. But I mean, the bottom line is I ultimately ended up at a church in Rock Island, Illinois. I was the outreach pastor there. And we had ministry partners that were in China and did medical ministry and stuff like that. And so I ultimately went on a mission trip to China and met the little.
So wait a second.
Yeah.
When you went to China, you weren't thinking about adopting.
Well,
because you said all along, look how God worked. But like one of our themes, and it's Britton's fault, but one of our themes, and it's really good language, and every new staff member, I was joking that it's your fault.
Oh.
Every new staff member contributes significantly to our lexicon, to our vocabulary, to our DNA.
Yeah.
And so Britton's always talking about giving God your yes.
Yeah.
And so far in your story, everything has been yes, 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 yes. But then when he spoke to Susan, it was no.
Yeah.
But in this 8-year process, so that's why I want to know. So you go to China just to do a mission trip.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I mean, that was the main focus. And
how did it change to?
Well,
because I've met Little Hope.
Yeah,
your wife's name is Hope. I've met Little Hope.
Yeah,
she's
Yeah,
she's a sweetheart.
Well, obviously, I mean, it's one of those situations when your wife's been praying you for 8 years. It's kind of like going back to for parents, like, don't give up. I mean, same thing with my wife, man. She never nagged me. She just was like, just don't forget about that little girl. And I knew she was praying for me, stuff like that. Well, the week before we were leaving for China, we had all of our, the team over, and just we're gonna have all their spouses and their kids and stuff like that. So we were having dinner, kind of last team meeting before we went on the trip, and one of the couples that were there, friends of ours, the wife was going, but they had Chinese international students in their home for many years. They didn't have any kids of their own, and at the time, and they so he in front of the whole team says, "Yeah, I told Stephanie, just bring a couple girls home that we can adopt or something like that." So then the topic of adoption comes up like a week before I'm going to China, and Susan's like, "Yeah, I've been praying for Eric for 8 years, and stuff like that." So then the team's like totally razzing me, and like, "Oh yeah." So like now
peer pressure, man.
It was peer pressure, but like, I mean, again, I'm at this point, I'm far enough in my faith journey to know that like this is an accident. Like, my wife's been praying for me for 8 years. I'm the pastor of a place that has a ministry partner in China, and now I'm going to China. And so we've ultimately went there and was sitting in a international church service or whatever, and the lady who was kind of our partner, guide, whatever for the trip, got up and gave this prayer request of this little girl who needed open heart surgery, and she was 2 years old at the time.
You see how this is all conspiring, dude? I got a little laugh tear.
I know.
Yeah.
Right there, a little laugh tear,
Yep.
Mr. Hole in your heart,
Oh,
the
my
Grinch
goodness.
over here from Diamond Bar.
So I'm like, seriously, like, and so I hear this, and I'm like, so I perk up a little bit, and they're like, "Yeah, this little girl needs open heart surgery." Well, like 3 days later, we're in her foster home, and I'm holding this little girl on my arms, man. And I still got the picture, when she's sitting on my lap, and I'm just like, okay, God, like I know I've been like saying no all these years, but like, is it time for me to say yes? Like, I know this isn't an accident. And so in the meantime, I'm calling Susan from China, like, "Hey, I met this little girl. She needs open heart surgery." And I mean, I couldn't see it, but like I could visualize it, just the smile on Susan's face for just being so faithful for all those years praying and all that kind of stuff. So we were having conversations, but I still at that point still hadn't really just like gone over the line, like, yeah, I'm ready to adopt. But I was like at least telling her about her name, Chinese name was Xiao Xia. And so we talked over a few times, and when I finally got home from China, the first night, I showed pictures of her and showed video and stuff like that. And it was like 2:30 in the morning, and I was jet lagged, and she's like, just like anything that she could do to stay awake because she still wanted to have this conversation. And so we're literally laying there in bed talking about it. I still hadn't said anything about adopting, but I did have this thought: if we adopt this little girl, I want to name her Hope. I had that in my mind. I didn't say anything to Susan. And so I have this thought, and like 2 minutes later, Susan says, "If we adopt this little girl, I want to name her Hope." And I'm like, we literally got out of bed and like went to the computer and like, how do you adopt from China? And it's a long, crazy story. It's so many miracles in the whole process, because that was like on a Saturday, and then on Monday I started calling a bunch of adoption agencies, and they're like, "Yeah, we can't work with you because China doesn't allow what they call pre-identified adoption. So you can't meet a child and then want to adopt them because of human trafficking and all that kind of stuff." So they're like, we won't even work with you. And so I probably called 4 or 5 different agencies, all saying the same thing. And then we finally got one that said, "Hey," they said the same thing. They said, "But we'll at least work with you, but you just have to know you're not going to get this little girl. It's never going to happen." And they said, it's going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. It's going to take miracle. They just said on and on. And I'm like, okay, we got it. And so we just were like, you know what? If you're willing to work with us, we feel so compelled that this is a little girl that we're supposed to adopt that like we'll go. And if it doesn't work out and we end up adopting another little girl, that's great. And so we started down the road, man. And I mean, I literally am writing a book about it right now because there's so many miracles in it. It really is an amazing story of just God's faithfulness, doing miracles. And obviously she's our daughter now. She's 15 years old. She was 5 years old when she came home with us. It took us 3 years to bring her home. And it was the most brutal experience of my life, of just the ups and downs, roller coasters of just heartache. And it was during that time I was, serving as his outreach pastor, missions pastor. And I was like, God just really kept laying it on my heart. Like, what are you going to do with this? Like, now that you know that there's this major need for, all these kids out there, like, what are you going to do? So we ended up starting a ministry kind of focused around adoption, because that was kind of what we were going through. And then I was like realizing, man, we got all kinds of international ministry partners that are caring for orphans. And then several years, like right after Hope came home with this, I was at my first Christian Alliance for Orphans conference, and they were talking about foster care. And I was like oblivious. I'm like, how am I an outreach pastor and I don't even know about this, And so we ultimately started a ministry focused around foster care, adoption, and global orphan care, and that was at the church. And then down the road is where we, after my dad passed away very unexpectedly, that we just felt like God was really stirring us to take that model that we had started at the church and really help lots of churches do it. So that's how Faces with Names ended up kind of launching and becoming reality and stuff like that. That was we moved back to Oklahoma at that time, and this is when we started the ministry. And
so you're the director, you're the president, you're the face of it, you're the whole show.
Yeah, I mean that's
Faces with Names.
Yeah, Faces with Names.
Why did you choose Faces with Names? I mean, it should be obvious, but just why did you decide to call it that?
So I was we had two mission teams out. One was in Burma, and the other was in Nepal. And so I flew over, and I was in Burma, Myanmar, with our team, and we ended up going to this prison way out in the middle of nowhere, and it was like 450 kids, young kids, 18
in prison?
In prison, 18 and younger. And I mean, it was out in the middle of nowhere. I remember I wrote about it. I wrote this blog about it when we were driving down this road, and the title of it was "The Road to the Unwanted," and I was like, so this is what the road to the unwanted looks like. It's just like you don't want to deal with these kids, so you just put them out there. And they're street kids or kids that, they had committed crimes and stuff like that, but about half of them were orphans. And so when we went there, I mean, I'm meeting these kids. I'm getting to, seeing their faces, learning their names and stuff like that. So that was kind of the first part of it. And then a couple of days later, I flew to Nepal. There were, lots of street kids in Nepal. And we were working with the orphanage there, and the guy who was kind of our partner at the time was like, hey, I want to take you out on the streets and show you these kids. And so we were leaving the next day. We were coming back into town about 11:30 at night, and I get on the back of his motorcycle, and he's like, I'm going to go show you these kids. So we're like right in front of the international airport in Kathmandu. I get on the back of his motorcycle, and I borrowed some like extra clothes, like jackets, stuff like that, from the people because I was getting on the back of his motorcycle. And we probably rode maybe a quarter mile, and we came across this first group of kids, and I was like, so he was talking to him, asking him questions, and this kid gave us his name was Robin, and he was 12 years old, and he was telling his story, and he had been on the street since he was 3 years old, and had just gotten abandoned by his parents, and he like survived all this time, and he was telling us, and I was like,
9 years.
9 years. Yeah.
12-year-old kid.
He was 12 years old. And I mean, like, my kids weren't that old at the time, but I'm like, I can't even imagine this. Like, I don't even, like, what I'm hearing right now does not have any filter for, like, real life for me at all, And it was so interesting because when that experience, when I got to see those kids, all these kids are sitting in, they had, all the street vendors, they had their boxes, that they just discarded. And so these kids had built a little fire. They were all sitting in boxes that they cut the front out of, flip-flops on, shorts, they had like a jacket, but I mean, it was cold out, man. I mean, it was cold, and they're just sitting there, and I'm like, this is not all right with me, And so that's really ultimately where Faces with Names come. I was like, I've seen his face, I know his name, and like, it's not just a kid's face on a brochure anymore for me, Like, this is a real kid, like God knows them. And the verse, that really kind of resonated with me was like, I think it's Psalm 147:4, I think it is. That might be wrong, but it's, it talks about God places the stars in the sky, and he calls them each by name. And for me, like when I read that verse, I was like, okay, if God cares that much about stars and names them and puts them in place, how much more does he care about these kids? And so that was kind of just the major shift for me of just put in a name with a face, and that God knows every single one. I write your name on the palm of my hand. I mean, like, he cares about these kids, and they're so discarded. And so, yeah, that was a major shift for me. Yeah.
So Faces with Names so your ministry is, you said, foster care, international adoption, or not so much anymore. You said orphan care. What was the third one?
Yeah, it was adoption, and that was kind of when we first started the ministry. That was really our focus, and it still is to a certain extent. I mean, we're definitely still engaged in that, but as you know, I mean, about 2 years ago, we kind of had this major shift to Uganda. And so before, I mean, we really were kind of serving as, consultants or whatever for churches to help them develop ministries around that same model that we'd started: foster care, adoption, global orphan care. And it's messy, man. I mean, it's a hard ministry. It's, there's a lot to it. I mean, it's not just an easy, like, hey, I'm just going to go serve one day. I mean, when you really start engaging in kids' lives that, come from really traumatic backgrounds and traumatic family situations, it's not an easy overnight fix. And so, I mean, we really tried to walk alongside churches, families that were doing that, and felt that calling and stuff like that. But the shift that kind of took place to Uganda started in 2019. I mean, I was really kind of in the lowest season of my life. We had served when we started Faces with Names. We were under the umbrella of another organization, and we had our 501c3 through them. And over time, I mean, they were amazing. We love them, still love them, and everything else. But it was difficult because people were kind of confused, like, why are you underneath this, and all that kind of stuff. So we were going to get our own 501c3. And anyways, in that process, the IRS made a mistake, and when it was all said and done, classified us as a 501c4, which is a political action group. Donors don't get tax donations.
Oh, my goodness.
And it shut us down. It basically kind of shut us down. And so I was like, okay, God, like, we're just gaining momentum, like things are really going well, and it's like, now what? Like, and so, I mean, I was renovating houses and doing some stuff just to try to make a living and stuff like that. Well, then COVID kind of was coming, and I was like, well, maybe am I supposed to go back to be a pastor again? All these different things. So I had interviewed for a bunch of different things, and all of a sudden it was kind of like nothing was happening. And I mean, I had never experienced that in my life. I mean, when I applied for something, I usually got it. I mean, for whatever reason. And that was kind of the only thing that I knew. And so, I mean, I was getting like turned down left and right for like almost a year and a half. And my wife and I mean, we're like, seriously, God, have you forgotten about us? And it was definitely it was kind of my, not really a crisis of faith, but just kind of like in the midst of all of it. I mean, I was still really saying, God, like, I trust you. I believe that you're going to do it. But it's hard because like we're sucking, air through a straw here. I mean, it's brutal. And so when all of that happened, I was at a Christian Alliance for Orphans conference in Louisville, Kentucky in 2019. And at that time, our Orphan Sunday leader from Uganda brought a king from Uganda to the conference. And so I got a chance to meet this king, just very briefly and stuff like that. It was cool. Got to take a picture
like a real life king.
Yeah. So in
Not
Uganda.
a chief.
Yeah.
Britton.
A king.
A king.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So in Uganda, there are 13 recognized kings. So they would be more like what would be considered governors or that, because there's a president and there's the kings. But I mean, in this kingdom, there's still 4 million people. So it's not like this little, I mean, it's still big and stuff like that. And so I met him and it was cool. Like, you don't get to meet a king every day and stuff like that. And
met a lord at the Tabernacle.
Yeah, I did. Yes.
Yeah, but you met a king.
So that was in May of 2019. And later that year, I mean, I had interviewed for another job, a pastor job, a month or so before that, didn't get it. And I were like, seriously, God. And so I'm out mowing my yard one day in September, and I get this call. I'm listening to praise and worship music again because I'm just like, God, I'm not giving up. I'm sticking with you. I'm listening to praise and worship music. I get this call. I don't recognize the number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but for whatever reason, I'm thankful I did. And I answer the phone, and it's this king from Uganda.
Who gets a phone call on his mower from a king? I'm calling shenanigans.
So he calls me.
How does the king have your, like, do you like swap digits with the king? Hey, can I have your number?
He asked for
I would
my
never
card.
go to a king and go, hey, do you need my number? King, do you need it?
I didn't ask him. He actually asked me.
It was like
The king
something you
asked
might
me for
need.
my
Yeah,
digits.
something you might need someday.
Yeah. So
What's his name? King what? King
John Wyberry. Chrysostom Wyberry.
Chrysostom. So King Chrysostom John Wyberry calls you.
And he says to me, I'm flying into Tulsa tomorrow. Would you be willing to pick me up from the airport and receive me into your home? And I'm like, sure. Like, do you say no to that or what, And
So the king of 4 million people, what'd you pick him up in, the minivan?
yes. Yeah.
You picked him in the Honda Odyssey.
Yeah. I'm like, that's what I had, man.
That was his
supposed to-
plan, though? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm over here like, that's such an international travel story, right? Like, I bought a ticket to this, but I don't know where we're going to stay or
Would
how
you show hospitality?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, did you have to kick a kid out of a room?
We gave up our room for him.
Oh,
Yeah.
He got the master suite.
So I'm like, I say to my wife, I go in and I'm like, okay, you're not going to believe this, but there's a king from Uganda coming tomorrow and staying at our house.
And I'm picking him
He
up.
called me while I was mowing.
You have to get the card
They're like,
detailed, and you're
what?
giving up your bed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Susan says, like, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know. We better clean the house, I guess. We still have stuff in our garage. Our garage still isn't functional after he came because we moved so much stuff out. We're like, it has to be clean, all this stuff. So it was crazy, man. I mean, I'm just like, seriously. But, I tell people that when we were asking God, have you forgotten about us? God sends a king from Uganda to remind us that the King of Kings had not forgotten about us. And I'm like, you can't even make this stuff up, So he comes, stays at our house, and it was
What's he
amazing.
doing in Tulsa? Would he go to that burger place?
Yeah, just going to Whataburger?
Yeah.
The first place we took him, Murphy's.
Did you take the king to Murphy's?
Yeah, gravy
gravy
overall. Gravy overall, yeah.
Did he like it?
He did like it, man.
Did he like it? There's not a person in this world, besides probably somebody from California, that wouldn't like Murphy's.
Yeah.
But what was he doing in Tulsa? Just wanted to hang out? Wanted to hang with Eric?
He had meetings, I guess. And so I took him to all these meetings, and then I said, I mean, like when you have a king staying near your house, you're like, man, I want people to meet him, So I set some meetings up.
Did you go to the? Sorry, there's too many details.
I know.
Did you show up in flip flops, or were you like, I'm gonna
No,
put on shoes?
I actually dressed up, man. I legitimately dressed up.
Was he dressed up or wearing joggers?
No, he was in a suit.
Dang, kings don't mess.
So it's interesting because, because people ask like, well, because like in Uganda, I mean, like he's got military guards and this whole unit and everything else. And
Don't tell me you called your brother. You called Chad. We need a security detail. Because he'd be like Bub. He had the 357 in his waistband with his CPL going, I got this.
You don't need one diploma.
He's
that's
like,
right,
his answer to that is, nobody knows who I am over here. I don't need
nice.
security in the U.S. Nobody knows who I am. So
He's a practical kid.
yeah,
I like
he is, and it's crazy. This guy has a biblical testimony, man. I mean, he was a born again Christian before he became king. He started off as a Catholic, and he had a death experience, and God saved him from that. He started writing worship songs, and of course, he's going back to the Catholic Church saying, "Hey, I want to sing these songs." And they're like, "No, we don't sing those kind of songs here." So he literally started his first church out in the front of his grandpa's house. He was an orphan himself, and he started singing worship songs that he'd written because God saved his life out in front of an orange tree. His first church that he planted, and it grew to 300 churches in Uganda that he was the bishop over. So he's
church
the
planner and a pastor.
That was his heart, and. If you remember back in the day, Idi Amin, military dictator, killed a bunch of kings, a bunch of them fled, and then the current president, Museveni, reestablished the kingships in the early 90s. So there's 108 clans as a part of what's called the Bugweri kingdom, and so they were kind of a lot of clans that didn't have, so they all joined together to develop this Bugweri kingdom, and he was the first king of the Bugweri kingdom, and
he's a Christian guy.
He's
a pastor and a king. How do I get that job? I want to be pastor.
What's he doing in Tulsa?
He's eating at the burger place, Murphy's. He's at Murphy's.
the only thing that I can say is that God sent him to us, man. I mean, like, because I'm asking the same thing, like how, like, what if I wouldn't have answered?
Yeah.
Or what? I mean, like, who else was he going to call? I mean, like, he already had a plane ticket. Wow. And so the only thing that I can say is that God sent him to our house, man. I mean, and I mean, I took him some other meetings. So he did have some other meetings set up, but I mean, awesome. I don't know who would have taken him if he hadn't. And even like with, like, talking about the guards and like, how does he, like, so like, he was legitimate, like still serving as a pastor and bishop. So he would go around to the churches. And so like after he became king, and so like when he would go into the churches, he would say to his military guards, "You're not coming in here. God's protecting me in here. Like, so I'm covered." And so, but I mean, even like the military guys that I've gotten to know have been there 3 times this last year. And I mean, those guys, they're believers. I mean, because they're just around this family, and this family loves the Lord, man. And so he was the only born again king in Uganda. And then also they had put him over like this, I don't know, it's like this club of, I don't know, it's not a club, but I mean, over this king, all these kings from all these different countries. And he clearly knew. He would say, "I know why God called me this. Like, I now meet with presidents, prime ministers, and kings, and I tell them about the King of Kings. That's why God allowed me to do this." So he is one of the most fascinating people I've ever met in my life. And so anyways, so when he came, I mean, it was just a crazy experience. It was pretty amazing and stuff like that, but didn't really think much about it. So that's the end of 2019. And going into 2020, first week of January, I get this random guy, I'd never even met this guy, calls me and says, "Hey, we have this ministry. It's based in Tulsa. We serve in Uganda. We're looking for a child sponsorship director. Are you interested?" Didn't even know this guy. So I'm like, "Oh man, maybe this is the connection with the king. This is why I came," and stuff like that. "Maybe this is how I'm going to get a job and stuff." So I interview with that. Another turn down, man. I mean, and then that guy had given my name to another guy, a church in Tulsa that worked in Côte d'Ivoire in Western Africa,
Ivory Coast.
Yeah, Ivory Coast, and they had a church ministry that they wanted to change into a 501c3, and they wanted to know if I want to be the executive director of that. That guy came up to my office, drove up to Bartlesville, met with me literally the week before COVID shut down. And I was kind of like, "Okay, God, like, what in the world's going on?" And so, but then it kind of started to make me think, like, man alive, I mean, if I was working for them, I'd be doing we started relaunched Faces with Names, it kind of, so I just started having these kind of like thoughts about that and stuff. But anyways, when COVID happened, I didn't have a job, I didn't have an income. And I saw on Facebook that we have a Walmart distribution center close to us. And they were like, "Yeah, exactly. You know it. Yeah." And so I'm like, I told my wife, I'm like, "They're hiring like you on the spot." Because I mean, that's when Walmarts were like empty and they couldn't hardly keep the shelves full. And I was like, I don't feel like it can get any lower for me at this point. Like, but I was like, I got to provide for my family. So I went, got a job at Walmart. I was driving a forklift. And literally, like the second day on the job, I'm working with all these people, not believers. And I go there on my second day. We're getting ready for just finishing up lunch. We're getting ready to time back in on the clock. And this lady says to me, "Is it true that you're a pastor?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am a pastor." I mean, I still to this day, I don't have any idea how they found out, because I never said anything unless like somebody from the HR department maybe said something to one of them, because I mean, obviously I told them that's my background and stuff like that. So the lady, and I mean, I was like embarrassed, man. I mean, I was like, "I've got a master's degree and I've worked at big churches and I've done all and I'm like, and now I'm going to go drive a forklift at, Walmart. And I was like so embarrassed. I told my wife and kids, I'm like, "Do not tell anybody that I'm working at Walmart." And like I said, I just felt like it couldn't get any lower. And that lady says to me, "Is it true that you're a pastor?" And I said, "Yes, I am a pastor." So the team, you worked in teams of 3, and the lady, as soon as that lady said that and asked me that, and then everybody's asking, like, is it true you're a pastor? I said, yeah, I'm a pastor. So I go back, we start working again. The lady who's training me, come to find out, she's a pastor's kid, grew up like 2 cities over from me in Southern California, and is like definitely not living for the Lord. I mean, like we started at 4:30 in the morning, and she's blasting Highway to Hell at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, and like it was crazy. So she started saying to me, "Oh yeah, so it's true you're a pastor?" And yeah, so my dad was a pastor, and I was like, "Okay, God, I know why you have me here," you know. And then it just changed my whole perspective. I'm like, if this is where you have me right now, this is what I'm going to do. And so I went from like, don't tell anybody to like, man, I'm working at Walmart. Yeah, I'm getting to minister to all these people. And it just changed my perspective. Well, about 2 months into that, I'm driving a forklift one day, and the Holy Spirit's just like, you're supposed to work with King John. And I'm like, I literally said out loud, God, do you really need...
Not you.
I ain't no king.
I was like, do you really need me to care for orphans and widows in Uganda? And it was just like almost an immediate response. If if you have a faith background and feel like God's talking to you, I mean, it was just like, God just said, no, I don't need you to take care of orphans and widows in Uganda. I just need you to be obedient. And I was like, okay, seriously, God, like now I've got to go home and tell my wife that you're calling me to Uganda in the middle of a pandemic to try to restart a nonprofit organization. Like nothing makes sense in this. So I went home, told my wife, and told her what God was sharing in my heart and laying on my heart. Excuse me. And she was like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. And so I just started doing a bunch of research. I ended up finding a organization that's from up here in Michigan. This guy had been working with the king for a number of years, supporting the orphans and widows over there. There's 2,000 orphans over there at 4 different orphan care centers or orphanages, and about 1,200 widows that they were caring for. And I was like, well, if there's already other organizations doing this, like, why do you need me to do this? And so I called this guy. I reached out to him by email, and then I called him. We got on a Zoom call. I told him the whole story, and he was just like, we've worked for them a long time, but like he said, I've never even been to Uganda. Like we only started this because out of obedience too, And so the more we got to talking and stuff like that, long story short, over time, they decided to give us their 501c3, so they disbanded their organization and gave us their 501c3, and then he became one of our board members and was really helping us work with the king. So for about 6 months, we're like, okay, how's this going to work? How are we going to, plan this and work with the king over there? And so in November of 2021, I was supposed to go over to Uganda for the first time, and it was right around or it might have been 20. I can't remember whenever our elections were. It was the same time frame as our elections, and they were having their elections in January. So they had a bunch of political unrest. There was a bunch of people that got shot and were killed in Kampala, and my board's like, yeah, you're not going. So I told him, like, I think I need to postpone. Let's wait till after the elections. I'll go over after that. And so that we're, now in February time frame of 2021, I guess it was, and he called me, and we were planning for my trip. I was leaving 2 weeks in February. I was going over 2 weeks later, and we're talking through it, and I could tell they didn't feel good. When you kind of hear that in somebody's voice. It was a Friday night, and Sunday morning I got a email from his wife, or a WhatsApp from his wife, who I had never communicated with anybody else. And through the whole process, I was like, hey, should we be bringing anybody else in this? He's like, oh, no, you just need to work with me. And, when you're the king, I guess you can say that or whatever. And so anyway, so that's Friday night. Sunday morning, I get this thing. He's in the hospital, and he's got COVID. And a week later, he died of COVID. And I'm like, seriously, God, like, I just have given the last 6 months of my life to, like, doing this partnership in Uganda. And now, other than the one guy from Orphan Sunday that I know in Uganda, the only other person I know in Uganda is now gone. And I'm like, what are you going to do? And what are we supposed to do? And so the family, obviously were mourning, but he evidently told them that I was coming, and so they invited me over there. So a month after he passed away, and they did they had a bunch of state funerals, and there was 3 different funerals. But he ultimately is buried at one of the orphan care centers where he grew up.
So he was really committed to this.
He was committed, man. I mean, they have 8 biological kids, but they have 22 kids total. So they have adopted, that many kids. And
so he was into orphan care ministry before you were.
Absolutely.
And he was an orphan.
He was an orphan.
Wow.
And so was the queen. She was an orphan as well. So they just have a heart for it. But I'm like, now what? What's going to happen, And so I ultimately went over there, never met them. You know how it is. It's kind of like showing up at Tui's house, never met him.
Danish Viking.
Yeah.
We must hug. Don't break me. Yeah.
So ended up over there, went up, saw 2 of the orphan care centers in the Bugwari Kingdom. And 1,000 kids between those 2. And I'm just like feeling overwhelmed. Like, seriously, God, I don't even know enough people to help me do this, and how are we going to feed all these kids? And because the king, he would, he had enough contacts that people would help him with that ministry side of things. And I'm like, I didn't know any of those people. And so I just remembering, how are we going to feed all of these kids, And that was the thing that just kept coming back to me over and over and over again. So after that trip, and it was an amazing trip. It was overwhelming, but I was flying home from Uganda, and I had a super long layover in Doha, Qatar. And one of my board members said to me, hey, when you get home, I want you to meet this guy that used to work with him at John Deere. He started this ministry in northern Uganda called Field of Hope, and they help with farming and stuff like that. And so after I got home, I got on a Zoom call with him, shared the story, all that kind of stuff. And he was just kind of interested in learning about us and me about him. But I said to him, I said, man, we'd love for you guys to work with us. I said, we don't have any money, but we'd love for you to work with us. He kind of chuckled, and he's like, you need to meet a good friend of mine that lives in Oklahoma City. This guy's like a farming expert. He worked at the Noble Foundation. He worked for Noble for 25 years, something like that, and then got hired by the Choctaw Nation, was over all the farmland, 65,000 acres for Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. And he set up all these farming things in Uganda. He's been to Uganda 25 times, set up a farming initiative for Watoto child care centers, which feeds 3,000 kids a day. And this guy's set up all of this. So he's like, you should go meet him.
I didn't think there was that many interesting people in Oklahoma. I thought I knew all the interesting people in Oklahoma. I worked for Choctaws in Uganda.
Yeah.
25 times.
You would be amazed at how many interesting people. So anyway, they go down and have lunch with this guy. Same thing. I said, we'd love to. I said, I don't have any money, but I'd love for you to work with us. They kind of chuckle. And a month later, I get an email from both those guys. They're like, hey, we've been praying about this. We feel like God's leading us to work with you. We want to start off by going over to Uganda. We'll meet you in Uganda. So these guys pay for their own way to go to Uganda, go look at this farmland that the church that's around the orphan care centers, and they're like, what can we do to help feed these kids? And so we did that last October, November, kind of end of October, first part of November, and come back, and they kind of put an assessment together and met with our board and said, if you guys want to do this, we'll work with you guys. And so they've committed to, it's a 3-year project. It's a sustainable, game plan and these guys have both committed to go over there 4 times a year. So Uganda has 2 planting seasons. So they have, planting and harvesting. So they're going for all of those. And then Field of Hope, who, Mike, the ministry they started, when we're not there, they'll send their people down to help train these guys. And at the end of 3 years, it's created to be self-sustainable, all run by Ugandans, and we'll feed all these kids that we're trying to take care of. So
unbelievable.
So yeah, that was just an amazing thing. And then from that, one of the guys Steve, the guy from Oklahoma City, he had a friend that helped build a big medical clinic at Watoto in Uganda during the same time he was doing the farming. So he reached out to him and just said, hey, would you be interested in helping us financially? Because, obviously we got to buy a bunch of tractors and all the farm stuff to get this thing done. So he was reaching out to him about that. And he said, hey, do you think they'd be interested in a a medical clinic like we did at Watoto. So from that conversation, this Dr. Mike Carnahan is basically on board with us now to help us build a medical clinic. And the cool part of it is, I mean, there's so many cool parts of it, but one of the adopted sons of the king and queen, he was a street kid in Kampala and was just starving one day on Sunday and stuck his head in the church, and they invited him in, gave him food, stuff like that, ended up adopting him. And when we were there in October, he had just graduated from medical school. So he just became a doctor and likely will be the person that, runs the medical clinic once we get it built over there.
The adopted son of King John.
Yes.
Who's the new king?
So it's not a bloodline kingship. So his eldest son Jeffrey was in, as a part of the elections or whatever, and he actually just got elected last Thursday to replace his dad. So he's in process to become the second king of Bugwari, and that's been cool because, I mean, just through this whole process, I mean, when he lost his dad and I lost my dad, I mean, I have just really gotten to speak into his life. I mean, a number of guys do that, but I mean, I'm one of them, and so I mean, I'm talking to him almost every single day on Facebook Messenger and stuff like that, and just really getting to speak into his life. And I'm like, it's one of those things. It's like, okay, God, I went from like the lowest seasons of my life to like now I'm mentoring a guy that just became a king like last week.
Britton, we got to up our game.
Yeah.
They got any kings of Manistee?
No.
There's no kings of, I mean, I know the former mayor, but so you're mentoring King Jeff.
Jeffrey, yeah.
Yeah, Jeffrey.
I mean, I'm
going to call him Jeff.
Yeah.
Wait, probably not to his face, though. Yeah.
He's a great guy. Lord willing, we'll get to bring him over here at some point.
So God you keep giving him the yes. Do you still work at Walmart?
I don't.
No, you don't work at Walmart. But even in that season, you're giving God your yes.
Yeah.
And there's a similar thread that I'm hearing that with your parents, with you, faithfulness.
Yeah.
When it looked like there was no hope.
Yeah.
I wonder how that played into that moment when you're like, God, have you forgotten about us?
Yeah.
The same way when they're going, God, is Eric going to make it to graduation, or is he going to be a stat?
Yeah.
Or is he going to make it? Freshman year of college when you didn't go to class.
I had a professor after one of my classes when I had an evening class, and he took me after the class. I gave this like horrendous presentation. I'm sure I was in with all these it was a lot of adult students that were working at Conoco or at Phillips 66 at the time, all these business. So I was like, I'm going to take a bunch of business classes. So I'm sure I didn't prepare for it. I'm sure I looked so stupid in front of all these people who were like legitimate business people and stuff like that. But after the class, the professor says, I want you to come to my office. So we go to his office. He calls my parents and are like, why are you wasting your money for this kid to be in school? Literally called my parents and said, you're wasting your money. He shouldn't even be here. And I'm like, wow. But it was, yeah, I know. But it didn't matter for him because the next semester is when God intervened and called me into ministry. So, but that was how it was going.
Wow.
So I'm sure, my parents are paying cash for college at that time, and I'm sure they're thinking what are we doing? What is going to happen with them? So you're right.
Yeah. Britton, I'm sure you got questions.
I've got all kinds of questions.
Go for it.
No, I think just the thread of don't give up that's getting pulled through this whole thing, walking into Walmart to drive a forklift. I just love the picture that we're seeing, just of faithfulness and the void of new direction, right? All we have is faithfulness. It's something that somebody told me. But I loved the phrase that you said of, I just need you to be obedient.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question with Uganda, with all the stuff that's unfolding with faces, with names, what's obviously building out the farm and stuff like that. But if as a ministry, right, how can people come alongside of that? How can people come along in that obedience? I think that this is a story that people are going to be pumped about. And so I think just given those.
I mean, obviously it's a situation where, we're still getting established with our ministry in Uganda. I mean, we definitely are open to if people ever wanted to go and see it firsthand, because it's a life-changing experience. That's an opportunity. With ministries, you guys know the reality of it, and especially with this farming deal. I mean, it takes money. I mean, we got to buy tractors, we got to buy implements, we got to buy seeds, fertilizer, all those kind of things. We've got to build a storage building to house the harvest, and in Uganda, because it's so humid and it's a tropical climate, we've got to buy all these hermetically sealed containers that so when the corn, maize, whatever gets in the beans, they get grinded and stuff. It goes into those and it kills any bugs or it keeps the mold out and all that kind of stuff. So there's just a variety of things that we got to raise money for. And so it's that, I mean, if people ever felt led, the thing that I love about it is just that the whole thing is sustainable. I mean, like Steve, the guy who's helping us from Oklahoma City, I mean, he started that one 11 years ago, and we got to see it when I was just there. I was just there in March a few months ago. And I mean, this thing 11 years later, fully functional, 48 Ugandans are running it. A bunch of the orphans who grew up in Watoto have gone to, ag school, and they're the one mixing all the fertilizer and all the stuff that they do. I mean, I don't know that much about it. I'm from Southern California, but it was amazing to me. And because I didn't even know what this was going to look like, and to see it firsthand, this is sustainable. This isn't just a handout. We're just not going to be buying food from forever. And the thing I love about it is if God calls me to something different, or if whatever. I mean, when we get them set up on this, whether we're there or not, they're going to be able to run it, because the way it works over time is that they start doing cash crops, and then they're able to just start, and then pulling seeds and stuff like that from the crops to plant in the future. So it's just a cool thing, but it takes money to do it, and the reality of it is that it's going to help these kids to really thrive. I mean, one of the cool parts of it for us, I mean, I dreamed our mission and vision statement. I was literally dreaming this, and I woke up and I was like, that's our mission statement. And our mission statement is to help orphans and widows move beyond a life of survival and thrive to fulfill their God-given purpose. And I just dreamed that, and I was like, that's what we want to do. And obviously food is a major element of that, to be able to help these kids get to a healthy place, and then the medical clinic, and then school and everything else. So, so that would be a big part of, if somebody want to jump in.
So your website is faceswithnames.org.
Yeah.
Faces with Names,
Yeah.
all lowercase. I guess that
I think it doesn't matter. Yeah.
But is there a place there that someone who's listening, they can drop down, they can do a newsletter, you get a email updates and how to pray, here's a trip, if there's ever a work trip or something like that, but there's also a place to donate?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's, there is a place for somebody who can sign up for email. I mean, if you just, it says contact us or whatever. And then we have the farming tab, on the top of the page that shares about this whole farming initiative and allows people to give there, or just in general to the organization. I mean, obviously, besides the farming, we have to function as a organization to keep it all going and stuff like that. But yeah, that's all at faceswithnames.org.
So right now the focus is Uganda, but as God leads, because it does sound like, and I'm not trying to make my story your story, but the common thread is, I've told people quite often, is I didn't plan anything in my life. I had an idea in Florence, Italy. It was yes, and I thought it was sports ministry forever.
Right.
But even then, it was God if you call. If I remember correctly, back in Florence, Italy, the call was, if God calls, you will say yes. Yeah. That's what the call was. That's what I'm remembering.
I think you're right.
You're not saying you're joining MAI, but if God calls you to sports ministry, if God calls you ministry, you'll say yes.
Yes.
Because I went back and, Eric was, I left this silly part of it. I was broke up with this girl named Darcy Kuhn from Buckley, Michigan. And I was like the saddest sack on that trip.
Man, he was pathetic.
I was pathetic. Yeah. But I got home from that trip, and there was a letter from Michigan that was in my room that had arrived when I was gone. And I opened the letter. It's my business. But it was, you're telling me there's a chance. And I was literally in the car 24 hours later driving to Michigan. Yeah. And, of course, we were engaged and then married. But both of us had the call to ministry. We both gave God our yes. But since then, I never planned Michigan, never planned pastor, never planned the Tabernacle. Never. It's just like Forrest Gump, like a feather on a breeze. You just keep giving God your yes.
Yeah.
And it's similar to that. And I didn't have some of the crazy, we had similar extremes, but not, I wasn't driving a fork truck in Walmart because I would have tore the place down just with it being inept with, driving a fork truck. But, so it's faceswithnames.org. And is there anything else on the horizon, like as far as other countries? Or is this like, look, back to what I just said, you're not looking beyond that right now. It's just we're going to focus on Uganda.
Yeah.
It started in China. But,
It's so... like I said, the whole thing with Nepal, that's always been in my heart, just because that was kind of where it got solidified with the whole thing with Faces with Names and stuff like that. But we certainly have our hands full right now with Uganda. But, I'm not trying to say, God, we want to end up in Nepal. But, I mean, it's one of those things that just kind of always is there for me, So if God says, hey, go to Nepal, I mean, I want to have that same mentality of saying yes and stuff like that. And I think the thing that I just would say about the whole idea of like saying yes to things is that I think most people feel like, oh my goodness, if I have to say yes, it's going to be terrible. But I mean, the yeses that I've said over time have led to the most amazing experiences of my life. You know what I'm saying? And
took a king to Murphy's.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Who gets to do that?
To Murphy's. I'm looking, you're just right here on our website, our internet down in the dungeon's a bit slow, but it says how to get involved. You or your church can get involved. Adopt an orphanage. It says you serve over 2,000 orphans and 1,200 widows in Uganda. You invite individuals, families, churches, businesses to care for orphans who may never be adopted. You can write letters to children that you can sponsor, so you do child sponsorship as well.
Well, we actually, when we decided to go down the road, we need to update our webpage from that, because when we decided to go down on the road with this farming deal, we felt like that was the better option for us, and so we have put the whole child sponsorship on hold at the moment because we feel like long term it's just better for them to be able to get fed, and then they're not dependent on anybody from the U.S.
So you want it to be self-sustaining instead of here's the steady check that's coming.
Absolutely.
So it's better that a donation goes to help this be something that eventually you can release to just be your own thing and not like how do you come to that? I mean, shouldn't Faces with Names, I mean, you need to have your flag on that thing forever and ever, don't you?
Well, no.
That was sarcasm.
I know it is. And it's interesting because I feel like there was a number of organizations that were kind of involved in different ways and stuff like that. And I feel like God's really allowed us to kind of be a catalyst to bring everybody together, but always with the intent of like, this isn't about any of us. I mean, this is about helping them and caring for these kids, and without really any of our names being relevant. I mean, yes, we have to have a name because we got to put it on our government documents here. And I love the meaning behind having Faces with Names, but it isn't about us. I mean, my goal is for us not to be needed there anymore. I mean, that is my goal. And so
work yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that it's a little bit different mentality because, there are a lot of, and I mean, there's pros and cons to child sponsorship, and there is a intrigue to that because it's like, oh man, I get to write a kid a note and I get to be involved with them and stuff like that. So this takes a little bit different mindset from an investment point of view, like if people donate, because it's like, it's kind of taking that back seat of like, I'm not going to be able to say I'm a child sponsor or I don't have the specific kid or whatever, but I'm investing in a big picture thing.
It feels more biblical to me.
Well,
something about not letting your left hand know
it.
what
Let
your
him
right
say
hand is doing.
Let him say
you're
it.
not saying it, I'm saying it.
Yeah. So
right? I think there's that whole piece, though, where it's in our giving and in our supporting of what God is doing in these places. So often we Americanize it, and we want to be able to put the banner up in our building and in our posters, and we want everybody to know what we're doing in this country. And it's like, no, this is what God's doing.
Yeah,
and we're just a part of that.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that it becomes an idol sometimes for people. And so I think that there's a level to this that is, no, we're going to give to God through this, and we're going to trust that over time, our giving to God is going to sustain what God wants to do here, not what I want to do here. Yeah. And so, I think that's good.
And it is. That's kind of another step of faith for us because, I mean, honestly, child sponsorship, I mean, it's successful. I mean, like you can get, a lot of people to jump on board with that. And, what we're doing is a little bit more kind of entrepreneurial. And so sometimes people aren't really wired that way to think that way. But the bottom line is that I feel like in the end, it's way better. It is, it is biblical because it is a sense that like people are giving without having to be recognized and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So, anyways,
that's awesome. So, kind of another question I have for people that are listening, people that want to support is, how can we be praying for Faces with Names?
Yeah, always wisdom and discernment. I mean, just when you start working in international and you have kind of the cultural dynamics, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, having been a missions pastor and been, had a lot of partnerships overseas, it is a tricky road to go down. And everybody, you hope everybody has good intentions. And I'm not saying about this with people that we're working with. I mean, I feel good about them. I feel they're trustworthy and stuff like that. But it's two different cultures. I mean, Uganda's got 54 different languages. So, I mean, there's just so many different dynamics to it, and that. And then for me, when you shift the focus to the kids, the idea that these kids would get out of the mindset that they're just surviving, you know, and that that we can create a partnership that, that the church there really comes alongside these kids and start seeing them more than just orphans. Because, there is a real stigma here in the U.S., around the world. If you're in foster care, if you're an orphan, that kind of thing, there is a stigma to it. And we've really got to get people to see beyond that and say, hey, these kids have value. Every single one of them they're not a mistake, that God has plans for them. But even for them, it's hard for them to get out of that mindset themselves, So for the kids, it's just praying that God would really expand their mindset of like, God really does have a purpose for me. And I really, I don't have to stay stuck in this orphan mindset my whole life, that God can really use me and stuff like that.
You can be a king.
You can be a king. That's exactly right.
You could be a king.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Eric. That's awesome. Do you use a Bible when you do stuff? Like, do you have a Bible you use?
I do, yeah.
It'd be awesome if you had a new one.
It'd be awesome if it had a Skylar Bible made out of goat skin.
Yeah, no free shout-outs.
Skylar Bibles make great Bibles with excellent goat skin. I may have one. I've already supported that.
Yeah, I think I have one. I think I've bought two.
You have two. And Skylar, if you're listening,
no free shout-outs.
No free shout-outs. Benji, what do you think? Nothing?
What do you want, Benji?
He's
stop giving them free shout-outs.
Because we haven't seen any Skylar Bibles. It's never going to happen.
Never?
There's
never say never.
I guarantee there's not a single person in Skylar that listens to this podcast.
Well, we don't know. We don't know. Right after this one,
changing that.
Yeah, with this happens.
I've never wanted.
What is the current financial need? Because I saw in there, and you said it wasn't updated, but you needed to raise was it $3 million?
No, not where. Yeah, 350 for the farming initiative for the 3 years. It's 350,000, and for the first year for us to buy all the tractors and everything, we need about 225,000. So that's building all the buildings, buying all the tractors, initial seeds, fertilizer is 225. We're just about. It doesn't show it on our website because we've had some people give outside and some anonymous and stuff like that, so it doesn't show on there. But we're at about 55,000 right now, and we need to get to 225. We were scheduled to start this late August, early September was when we were supposed to have our first season. That was what we were intending to and stuff like that. But we just didn't get the funds enough, so we've pushed that out to March of next year. For first seeds in the ground. So really between now, really over the next 3 months or so, Lord willing, we'll have those funds because we still have to buy it. We still have to get it all. It's about 4.5 hours up to where we're at. So we got to get all the stuff bought. We need to get all the stuff up there. We need to get the buildings built. And we just have looked at it and we're like, could we start, with less? And we're like, we could, but because this is so incremental and we're training them, we don't want to create bad habits just because we don't have the right funding or the right tools for them. So we're like, you know what, we're not going to get ahead of God. We're just going to be patient. God, you orchestrated all this, and when the right time comes and the right people who see this as the investment, kingdom investment that it is, that we'll have the money. And so really to start next year in March to have those first seeds in the ground, we need 225,000.
225,000. So there's 3 or 4 people that are listening right now that you got that.
Yeah, Harbor Church, The Porch, Inola, Harbor Ulaga, Battle Creek, Tulsa. You guys know who you are that's listening.
Yeah, no,
Somebody step up.
No, I was talking about the Tab family.
Oh, yeah, 100%, but I got more.
Rizzy.
Yeah.
I'm sure Rizzy, he's got that Italian Mafia connection. Don't you think he's got somebody that...
Something.
I don't know, he plays that.
It's cool stuff, though.
Yeah. There's other closet. The former mayor of Buckley, Dennis Kuhn. Maybe he's got that. We don't know.
I love it. It's cool stuff.
Yeah.
Really cool.
So, faceswithnames.org. Also, have you checked the email to see if we got any questions yet?
No, we haven't gotten any.
Would you make an alert, bro?
I get the emails. We haven't gotten any.
We've got, okay, so people have no questions. They have no comments. Apparently you're listening because we see
one
the
person
downloads.
email us about Gibby's fries.
Oh, Gibby's fries. What was the email?
I guess
about?
you guys said something about Gibby's fries. They sent us an article.
Gibby's fries they're amazing. Gibby, I mean, you'll change your day for Gibby's fries. But it's questions that you want to answer on the podcast or comments or whatever, tabpodcast@thetabchurch.com. But the name we really want, and you'll put this in the show notes thing, the little link. Can you put a link? Do you know how to link?
Yeah.
Can we link to faceswithnames.org?
Absolutely.
Go there, pray for Eric and Susan, their 3 children, Reagan, Caitlin, Hope. And you know what? I asked her, can I call you Hopi? Because I know, no, she was like, no. No, she was like, only,
Hopi.
She goes, only silly, or something like, people, don't call me Hopi. I got that loud and clear.
Yeah.
So sorry, Hope Bishop, but Hopi Bishop is Hopi Bishop, but Hope Mills is your youngest daughter.
Awesome.
So pray for them,
Yeah.
give to them, and thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Yeah,
that was awesome,
thanks
man. Thanks for
for
sharing.
too.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. Well, Tab family, I think there's one thread we've pulled through this whole thing is keep giving God your yes. And he's faithful to be the one that does the work. So, yeah, obedience is key. So figure out what your yes is this week, and maybe you need to say it. So until next time, this is John, Eric, Benji, and Britton signing off.